how to do a Strippy landscape. I live in the mountains in Colorado and I love the mountains, but I also really love the water. And so I want to have a little water scene so that I can remember the waves, the crashing of the waves, and the sand and the blues of the water. So this is what we're going to make today. And the first thing you want to do is start thinking about what kind of landscape you want to make. I had in my mind's eye what I wanted to make, but I also knew I wanted to look at some photos to get some further inspiration. So let me show you a couple of photos and some of the things I was looking for. As you start to look at the different water scenes, you can see that there's not just one color of water. It goes from blue to blue-green. There's some blue-violet in there too. And the water changes depending on the depth below it and depending on what's underneath it. Sometimes it's rocky, which makes it a little darker. Sometimes it's sandy, which makes it a little bit lighter. Usually when you're looking at landscapes, when you're looking at scenery, the colors are more intense the closer they are to you. And so you've got dark mountains at the front, and the further the mountains go away, the lighter they are in color. With water, it tends to be the opposite. You have lighter colors of blue at the closer to you, and darker colors of blue the further away you go. And that's, again, because you've got the depth going on and different things happening underneath the water. So it's different if you're doing a mountain scene from doing a water scene. One other thing I want to show you on the photos is not to center your horizon or your transition point. It's much better to follow the rule of thirds and put your horizon, as you see in these photos, at 1/3 of the way. You can do it at 1/3 from the bottom or 1/3 from the top, but you'll create much more interest in your landscape if you're at a third point rather than in the center. So with my design in mind, next thing I want to do is start gathering my fabrics and pulling together lots and lots of strips of a variety of blues to get my water fabric in place. Okay, so now I have a lot of blue fabric cut into strips. I cut these about 2 inches wide. You can go anywhere from 1.5 to 3.5 inches wide, all depending on what size you want your finished project to be. The length of these strips is approximately the width of what my final project will be. So it'll be driven by the shortest strip that ends up in the final project. So I've got blues, I've got blue-greens, I've got going from dark to light, and I arranged them in what I think is probably light to dark so I can begin to make those decisions about where they're going to stay in place. And value sometimes can be really hard to see when you've got color on top of it. So I made photocopies. I did a black and white photocopy of these strips so that I could see exactly where they are. And when you start to look at the black and white photo, you can see this strip here, which is this one here, is a little darker. It probably could move up in place. We've got a lot of contrast going on in a couple of these strips where there's a lot of dark and light. And when you're working with batiks, that's going to happen as well, where you just have to look at it and decide, is there too much going on to make it fit into what I'm working towards? And some of the light parts in the dark area of the blue I really like because it looks like the sunlight sparkling on the water. So if you're having trouble seeing the value of your fabric, doing a black and white photocopy or using a digital camera and editing your photo to be black and white is a really good way to see what's going on with the value. And so once I did that, then I started looking at, okay, which ones do I want to take out? I know that I cut more than I'm going to need so that I have space to edit these. When you cut the strips, sometimes it looks very different than where you started with the original fabric. And as much as this one has the yellow, which could be sunlight sparkling on it, I didn't like it because the pattern was too regular for me. I wanted something a little more organic than that. So I took that one out. And this one I decided was too short. And so I took that one out. Now, if I wanted to keep it in, I could always sew another little piece on the end just to make it longer, but that wasn't necessary. I like the little mottled going on, but I probably don't need both of these in here, so I'll take one of those out. And I know I took some leaves out because I know there's plants going on in underwater, but I didn't want leaves floating on the top. And when I was looking at it, especially when I was looking at the black and white, I didn't like the splotchiness of this. I like this part, but this was a little too much going on, so I took this one out. And I just kept editing and saying, okay, which ones do I like, which ones do I want to take out, and figured out until I ended up with the final arrangement of my water. And then I did the exact same thing with the sand fabric, so that I end up with all the strips of fabric that I want to use in order on a design board, so it's real easy then to pull them off in order as I begin to sew. And we're ready to start making the project now. Okay, so now you have your fabrics all in order on your design board. It's time to start sewing. So I take a piece of backing and a piece of batting, and you want to make them a little bit bigger than you're aiming for your finished project. The good thing about this is it's pretty organic, so you don't really have to cut a certain size. You're just aiming for a little bigger than you want your finished project to be. Protect your surface and use spray base to put these together. Be sure to spray the backing fabric, not the batting. Spray the backing lightly and then smooth the batting out on top of that. After you do that, it can help to eyeball about 1/3 of the way up and mark a line so that you know where that transition point is. So I'm doing a little bit of sand and more water, so my transition point will be towards the bottom of my project. So then I'll take my first my fabrics. So my first fabric at the bottom, which, because it's a batik, doesn't really have a right or wrong side, but because I wanted this one longer than the strip I had and I pieced it together, this one does have a right and a wrong side. So I want it right sides up, lay that one at the bottom. Take your next strip, and if you have a definite difference, you want to put them right sides together, but don't sew them straight on like this. Create a little more interest by creating an angle. And after you create your angle, you want to pin it in place a few spots to hold it so that you can take it to the sewing machine. And you're just going to sew a regular 1/4" seam along here. Once you've done that, you'll want to trim off the edge by the seam allowance. You'll press this forward, and then you're going to keep building it. And let me show you a few strips sewn on. So you can see here now that I've got angles going. I try to vary them so that they're happening at opposite ends. I don't always start at the very top. Sometimes I want to create this shallower, so I'll start not at the edge of the fabric, but in a little bit. And again, a little bit of an angle, pin, trim, and press. And again, I've got my line here, so I know I'm aiming to this spot here, so that my sand will go from here to here, and then I will transition to my water fabric. And you keep doing that until you have all of your fabrics in place. So I've got my sand, I've got my darker sand by the water's edge, I've got the white foamy water here, and building all the way out to the dark sand. Now, the fun thing about this is because you've got all 3 layers together, you have been quilting as you sew. So as you build the top, you're doing a quilt as you go project as well. And you could finish this at this point and call it done. But first I want to show you what adding a little more quilting at this stage can do to create even more variety and interest. Okay, so you have your pieces all sewn together, and I want to show you the difference that adding more quilting to the project makes. I used a variety of threads. These are all silky blendables, and what I like about the blendables is that the colors change at random lengths. And so you've got, in this case, yellows, yellow greens, blue greens going on, but they're all changing randomly. So that helps add interest to the quilting as well. And so on the quilting, you can see that I added sometimes gentle curving lines. Sometimes they're more shallow than others. Sometimes they echo the line above them, and sometimes they've got a little more movement in them. I used each color for maybe 2, 3, 4 lines of quilting, and then I would change to the next color and be blending them, blending the colors the same way I was blending fabrics. I did try to make sure that I would bring a line of quilting that would cross over the fabric seams, and you can see that here. And again, that just helps create the movement of water. So that's I like it a lot better once I've added the quilting to it. There are some other things you can do if you're interested in having more than just a water scene. And let me pull the thread out. If you, for example, want a sailboat in your water, you could applique a sailboat to the water. And I would do that before adding the additional quilting, because then you can add quilting lines to help mimic the movement of the boat through the water. If you do machine embroidery, you could add a palm tree. And again, I would do that before I did the quilting, the additional quilting, so that you can quilt around it. So you can applique things to this, you can do machine embroidery on it, you can use this background in a lot of different ways to create the scene that you're looking for. And those are the things you would do before you finish it. After you've got this completed, you've done all the quilting, all the applique or embroidery on it that you want, you would trim your edges up square, and then you would finish it. I finished mine with a facing, and there are a few more things I want to show you that you can do after you've got the top completely finished. Just a couple more ideas if you want to embellish your piece a little further. I remember as a little girl walking on a family vacation and picking up shells at Virginia Beach. And so I wanted to see how I could add some shells to this. So I took a little piece of tulle and can throw some shells down on top of the tulle. And then very carefully, bring the tulle around, create a little pocket out of the tulle, and very carefully hand stitch this in place. Bring your stitches in close around the edges of the shells to hold them in place, and the tulle basically disappears, and you've got shells on your beach now. In addition to that, if you want to create more sparkle, you could definitely add beads into the water and onto the sand. And again, you would sew these down by hand and create even more motion and more interest as you take a look at these. So those are just some of my ideas of how you could further embellish the beach scene. This will be great when I actually get to those parts on that, don't you think? One more thing I want to show you. If you start with a bigger panel, you can create a beach bag. So this is all the exact same technique that I just showed you. It's just a much bigger panel. These probably started 40 inches wide, full width of the fabric, and created a beach bag. So again, my transition point is about 1/3 up, but the one thing I did have to do was make sure I had enough on the bottom, so my sand was actually a little bit longer this time when I created the panel, so I had enough space to create the bottom on the sand. So whether it's the ocean or the mountains, whatever your favorite nature scene is, I have had a lot of fun creating these, and I hope you do too.